We're continuing Pei Dalet Halacha Dalet. Last week, I'll start from the beginning of the Shulchan Aruch, even though we read part of it last week. The Mechaber said, this is the part we read last week, Talam Hagdel Beparis Betolish, insects that grow on a fruit that's unattached on the ground, Mutarim, they're Mutashli Ashatar, El Sheretz, Sheretz, El Aretz. The only Isser is to eat a bug that crawled on the ground. Now the Shulchan Aruch is going to tell us a bunch of exceptions to that rule. That's all true. If they didn't leave the pre, if they left the pre, I'm going to say a bunch of cases and I'll explain to you afterwards. It left the fruit and it died before it hit the ground, meaning it was never sheretz al aretz. It only partially left the pre. It only went onto the outside of the pre, or it left the flesh of the fruit and went onto the pit on the inside. Went from one fruit to another without passing through the air on the outside. Also, in all those cases, it's also. Okay, and I'm going to explain in a minute what the point of each of those cases is. Okay, and the end of the Shulchan Aruch says, there are those who hold that it's also to eat even if the bug died while it was inside the fruit, and then it left the fruit after it was already dead. All the cases beforehand was it left before it died. In this case, even if it died before it left, then it's also. Yesh in that case. Really, we're going to leave that for Halacha Hey to talk about that, or those words in the Mechach. I'm sorry, no, not that part, the next part. As long as the bug is inside of the fruit, even if there's a hole to the outside of the fruit. So it's a good reason to think that the bug really left the fruit already, because there's a hole heading right outside. It looks like it might have gone outside. You don't have to be chayshish that it left and came back into the fruit. But the Ramah says, there are those who hold that if there's a hole to the outside, you do have to be chayshish. So the Ramah says, we're on that child. Okay, that last part, that's what I'm going to say, that last part, that chaynok of l'chutz, we're going to leave for Halacha Hey. It's a guess sort of to Halacha Hey. That's what people talk about it. We're going to wait for Halacha Hey to talk about that part. So now we'll talk about just the main part of the middle part really of Halacha Hey that we saw. Okay, the Gemara in Chulin, Samasai, asks, how come the din is that bugs in water are mutter, in a kli are mutter? Why aren't we chayshish that the bug crawled onto the inside of the pail, the inside walls of the pail? I mean, there's a bucket of water. Why are we chayshish that the bug crawled out of the water onto the inside walls of the pail? Okay, the Gemara says that there's a pasuk that teaches us that even though the place where the bug was born was in the water, there's a pasuk that teaches us that the inside walls of the pail also have the din of ribusayu. It's also considered its habitat. Not just the water itself, but even the walls that are of the inside walls, those kids are also considered ribusayu, and therefore if the bug would have crawled onto those walls, it would still be considered in its original habitat and it would be mutter. Okay? That same kind of a question is what's going on here in our Gemara, in our Shulchan Aruch over here, which is our din over here with these bunch of cases, is really the next piece of Gemara over there. The Gemara on the meis has a whole bunch of these questions that we're seeing right here. Are all these things considered that it left its habitat? In the water, the Gemara says, even if it walks onto the walls of the kli, on the inside walls of the kli, the inner walls of the kli, that's considered it's in its habitat. And the Gemara has questions about insects that are in fruits. What does it have to take to get out of its habitat? As soon as it leaves its habitat, it becomes usher. So what does it take to have left that original habitat to be considered? And we have all these scenarios, the Gemara says, and for all of them we're machmir. Okay, now, we're going to see in Halacha Hey, we'll see that most poskim hold that the rules for what's a habitat for water bugs and for land bugs are not the same. Okay? Water bugs and land bugs do not have the same rules as to what is the habitat and what's not. But I'm just, for the conscious of the Gemara, in explaining a water habitat, the Gemara has said it's more expansive than you might think. It includes the inside walls of the kli, which you might not have, that's not where the bug lives. And now for fruit, the Gemara had all these shilas, and the Gemara has, the way we have the Gemara has 6 shilas about which things are considered to have left did it leave its habitat? The shilas that we just read through. Okay, just for the Gemara doesn't answer any of those kashas. The Gemara just doesn't answer any of those questions, and the Shulchan Aruch has to be machmir on all of them. Okay, just for if anyone's paying attention, the Gemara has 6 questions. The Rif only has 4 questions. Okay, the last 2 questions are not brought in the Rif, and our Shulchan Aruch really only brought 5 questions. Okay, the Torah and Shulchan Aruch combine the first and the third. You'll see why. They combine the first and the third questions together. Okay, but the Gemara has 6 questions. The Shulchan Aruch has five shilas, and all of them were machmir. Okay, so I'm just going to go through the different cases, just to tell you. I'm telling you the way Rashi learns. Basically, the way Rashi learns what the chiddush of each of the cases is. Okay, the first case is the bug died before it hit the ground. Okay, so the question of the Gemara is that it never was reichish, it never crawled on the ground. The pasuk says it has to be sheretz alaretz, but on the other hand, it did leave the fruit. So maybe the point of the pasuk is not that it crawled, but that it left its fruit. And sheretz alaretz is the usual way of saying it left the fruit that it went. That's the first shayla of the Gemara. The next is the insect that left the fruit partially. So the shayla is, does it have to leave, when it says sheretz alaretz, does that mean that it has to completely leave the fruit and be on the ground? Or is it enough that it only just is not completely in the fruit? It's half in and half out. So is the point of sheretz alaretz to say that it has to be off the fruit completely? Or does it have to just be not anymore in the fruit? So that's the shayla, if it's half in the fruit and half out the fruit. Next, if it's completely out of the fruit on the outside of the fruit, that's the next shayla of the Gemara. Okay, let's say it has to leave the fruit. It has to leave completely, but it went onto the outside peel. That was the third shayla that we have in the Shulchan Aruch. It's on the fruit of the outside of the fruit. Then the Gemara's question is the fruit is the riboside. It grew on the inside of the fruit. On the inside, that's where it lives. It's eating and it's growing inside there. Well, is the outside considered part of its? Is that like the extension of the fruit? That's still the fruit? Or do you say no? The living place is on the inside. For a bug, the living space is in the fruit, but the peel is not the living place.
So you got to reverse the order, right?
Because
first you have to say if it goes all the way totally out, is it us or not? And if you say it is,
no. The reason why that's not true is because the Gemara, in the question of if it left partially, it's not talking about where it went to. If you need to go to peel, then it went to peel. If you need to go to land, then it called on to land. It's not negated where the other half of it went to the other hand, went to the place that it's allowed to. Whatever counts as out. But it's only half out.
And that was the place that it's not allowed to.
Right, where it's considered out of the... Okay. And then the child is on the outside. But then the Gemara child is, the next class is what went onto the pit. Okay, now, I would have thought that the question of that Gemara is that the pit is not where it grows. You would think the pit is not the living place. The fruit is the living place. So the shayla is, does the pit maybe somehow tuffle to the fruit? Even though the pit is not a living place, crawling onto the pit. Think about a peach pit, okay? Crawled at a plum pit. It crawled out of the fruit onto the pit. It left the living space. Is that considered that it left? Or is the pit considered tuffle to the fruit? That's how I would have understood the shayla.
And the truth is?
And Rashi says not like that. Rashi says exactly the opposite. I don't know what Rashi means. But Rashi says is, the ikar place of a bug growing is in the pit. That's the ikar place. So I don't know exactly what's happening. So Rashi is making it as if that the pit is more likely, the pit is not the flesh, but it's more likely to be considered flesh than the outside is, because the outside of the fruit is nothing. But the pit is somehow, Rashi uses the words, it's the ikar, he says bugs grow from the pit. I don't know what that means. So I would have thought just the opposite. I would have thought the shayla is that of course the pit has nothing to do with growing. It's this hard thing the bug can't grow on, but maybe it's tougher because it's on the inside. Okay, yeah, that's how Rashi knows. And the last shayla is, if it went from one fruit to another fruit, Rashi explains what that means is that it went from one fruit to another fruit without passing through the air. If it had been crawled from one fruit to the next one, of course it was Pirish. Rashi says it went straight from one fruit right into the next one. Let's say, think of a cluster of grapes. It went from one grape right into the next one. And the shayla is, do we say it left its habitat because it was growing in a grape? Or do we say the fact that since the two grapes are touching each other, it's like an extended habitat. It's just it's just a bigger fruit. It's just two pieces, but it's really one fruit. That's the shayla. Okay? So now, we had the 6 shaylas in the Gemara. I told you 5, but there are 6 shaylas in the Gemara, and on all of them will be machmir. Now, if you would pay careful attention, and especially if you read Rashi speaks out clearly, that some of these shaylas are totally one on the other. Some of the shaylas are not going to be a shayla unless we already know the answer to the previous shayla. In particular, Pirish meis, if you hold that Pirish meis is asur, then I forgot which one. One of the later shaylas doesn't make sense. I forgot Rashi says. I forget now which one it was. Okay, Rashi says clearly. The only way it is, I forgot which one of the later shaylas is assuming that it has to be Pirish when it's alive. I don't remember which one. It's not clapping now. What should be there? I don't remember. Anyhow, so Rashi says that the totally says is there. I'm sorry that I don't remember which one. Okay, so one of the shaylas is dependent on Pirish meis being mutter. So we have a rule. we usually have a rule that says that when we have an intim soimer, the Gemara asks many questions, and one is dependent on an assumption about the previous question, then the fact that the Gemara would ask the second question implies that we take on that assumption of the first one. But we ask the first question, the second one implies we know the answer to the first one, or else we couldn't have asked the second. So that gives the impression that that we already know the answer to the first one, even though the Gemara doesn't say the answer. How goofy that we ask the question implies that we already know the answer to the first one. It's as if the Gemara spoke it out. So the kasha is, so on this question of Pirish Umeis, I'm sorry, I forget which one it is, because Pirish Umeis, the Gemara couldn't have asked another kasha without answering that one first. So in Cain, we should pass them a Pirish Umeis, that it should be mutter. Why are we passing it? They're all usher. There's an intim slimer in the Gemara. Rashi says in two different of the questions, he says intim slimer, that they're totally on an earlier question. So why don't we say that if Pirish Umeis should be mutter? Because it's totally on an intim slimer. Okay, so the answer to the question is, that's correct. That's correct. If most people assume that's how most people assume. You'll hear a Beis Yosef in a second. Most people assume that that's correct. That we follow an intim salimer. It's true. Not everybody agrees to that, but we usually follow it. So the Beis Yosef will cover the bezin. The Beis Yosef in Ebenezer. What we are looking at Ebenezer. Kuf Chaf Beis in Sim Kuf Chaf Beis. At the end of Kuf Chaf Beis says that rule that we pass like an intim slimer, that rule that we pass like the assumption of the intim slimer, is only if the Gemara says those words beferish. Only if the Gemara says intim slimer like this, then like that. If the Gemara just says something that in logic shows that that's what it held, then it's not. Then we don't say that. We only say it when the Gemara speaks out those words, intim slimer like this, then we do that. But if the svar of the Gemara looks like that, that's not enough to pass like that. Okay. Now over there, the Bach says, where did he come up with this from? Where did he come up with such a rule? The svar of it says you should pass like the intim slimer in all cases. The idea is, the reason why we pass like the intim slimer is because the Gemara is showing what it really held. So what's the difference? But the Beis Shmuel and Pichodesh should bring rayas that it's true. And in fact, if you want to say this, we'll be really courageous. We'll say that our din right over here is a raya to that. But how come we didn't pass like Pirish Umeis' mutter? That shows you this rule that the Beis Yosef says it's another raya to that rule that intim slimer, we only pass on an intim slimer if the Gemara says those words straight out, intim slimer. Here the Gemara just is kasha, a bunch of kasha, and the Gemara just doesn't answer. Okay. Now another thing is after the Shulchan Aruch said all these cases, the Gemara said another case. The Shulchan Aruch said another case there's another case. Okay, he says another case, which is not that it died after it left the fruit before it hit the ground. It died in the fruit, and then it was pirish afterwards. Okay, pirish meis, not pirish umeis, pirish meis. And that question, it's Halachos Rishonim what they did in that case is, it's totally in the gears from the Gemara. Is the Gemara Shiloh is pirish meis, it left dead, meaning it died in the fruit and it left dead, or is the Gemara Shiloh pirish umeis? Okay, that's the Shiloh. If the Gemara's question is pirish, the Gemara says pirish umeis mahu. Okay, so the Shiloh does the Gemara say pirish umeis mahu? It left the fruit and it died, meaning it died before it hit the ground. It was never shayritz because it died as it was leaving the fruit. That's pirish umeis. And the others learn that the Gemara Shiloh is pirish meis. It died in the fruit and then it left already dead, meaning it didn't even have a chance to be shayritz.
It's a question of the girsa?
Yeah, that the Halachos Rishonim is a Halachos in the girsa of the Gemara.
I don't get it. What's the Shiloh if it was pirish chai and then died?
Pirish chai meaning it never was shayritz on the ground. It died on its way onto the ground.
Well, what's the Shiloh? It was pirish chai.
Yes.
And then died.
And then died before being shayritz al aretz.
Oh, so it was pirish to where?
Pirish, here's the fruit. It was pirish, and as it was hitting the ground, it died.
It died on the way down to the ground.
On the way down, right. And then it started walking, and then it couldn't walk. It was never shayritz.
So it left the fruit
alive
into the air.
It left the fruit, and as it was heading to the ground, it died. It had a heart attack.
And the other side is that it died before it got out.
The other side is that it died in the fruit, and then you pulled it out of the fruit. And now, it's easy. That would be the easy case, that it died in the fruit.
So if you say that it died after it got out, then that's totally on the Shiloh of assuming that if it coming out before it hits the ground, it's mutter still.
Right, so there we go. That's what the intim was. If you're going to say that pirish umeis is osur, that means it's osur just for leaving the fruit without having been shayritz, then surely if you went on to the avir of the fruit, if you say that case is osur, okay, I remember the intim. There's an intim. I forget. I'm sorry. I have to go through the cheshbon again. I can't think of Anyhow, so that's a Halachos Rishonim, and the Shulchan Aruch brought V'yesh Oisrim in the case of Pirish meis. Okay? And the Shach over here is very not happy about it. Okay? He brings that the Teres Chatas, that the Ramah is makel about that din. It's a Halachos Rishonim, makel about the din of Pirish meis. He brings a bunch of diukim from the Mechaber later on, not all that everyone agrees to, but a bunch of diukim from the Shulchan Aruch himself, that the Shulchan Aruch is also makel about it. He says it, but he brings diukim from later the halacha that he's also makel about it. The Shach ends up basically that you could be makel about this in a Pirish meis. Okay? But he brings, you should just know that Minchas Yaakov argues, and he says all the rayas are not true, and really the din is Pirish meis is aser, or it's a Halachos Rishonim, and we should answer it. And then you'll remember that this is nageh. It sounds like this crazy case, Pirish meis. You'll remember that it was nageh to the coke bugs. Okay? The bugs in the water. Those bugs were Pirish meis. We said, even if you're going to say that the reservoir is considered a kli that holds water where they don't become usher, it's considered a kli. It's considered a charitz and it's considered a place that the bugs are mutter while they're there. We ask the question: as soon as you take the bug into your food, as soon as it gets out of the sink, it's going to become usher. So to that we said to remember that over here is going to be a case. There's Pirish meis because it dies before it leaves the reservoir, before it leaves the extended reservoir. And as soon as it moves from the big reservoir into a next section, it gets killed with the chlorine. So it's Pirish meis. It doesn't get out of the ribusayu until it's dead. So this theoretical case of Pirish meis, and Yossi's looking at it, like, what kind of cookie case the bug died as it was falling out? That's mamash the case over here. That we have the case here that the bug, what?
Not the same case. Bug died.
No, but conceptually, that idea that it could be Pirish meis is very for real. Okay, it's very for real for those people. And yeah, we talked about this, but we said that we'd asked the kasha, how could you say that it's mutter ayi went out of the kli? And we didn't say it's only because of this, but it was a Sfekos, if you remember, based on this shaila about whether Pirish meis is also. Okay, now we have the Gemara. The Gemara's. Do you want to say something else?
Yeah. So at the end of the day, so Pirish meis is definitely Halachos Rishonim, and it's Halachos who we pass like. Who should pass like.
The Shulchan Aruch says the words, the most clear words are the words of Shulchan Aruch. V'yesh amrafil meis chapri. Some people hold. Earlier he had said Pirish umeis is aser. And it says v'yesh oisrim in that case. The Shach is not convinced that the Mechaber really holds like that. And the Ramah in Teres Chatas says you could be mekel. The Shach really is mekel himself. And Minchas Yaakov answers up all those rayas. He doesn't think any of that is true. So that's a machlokes. So we then over there said back over there that it was a Sfekos. Safek of Pirish meis is aser. Safek we should pass like the Taz or the Shach about if it went from a kli to a kli. You'll listen to the recording. Okay, anyhow, so the Gemara has all these. The Gemara asks these questions in two groups. There's two groups of questions, 3 and 3, and the Gemara answers Teiku to both of them. The Gemara says the first 3 questions Teiku, the next 2 questions are Teiku. Okay, so what should be the din? We see everyone here is being machmir. What's the din when we have a Teiku? So the usual rule is that if you have if Teiku is on a deraisa, then we're machmir. If it's a safek deraisa, we're machmir. And we're safek deraisa, we're mekel. Okay, we have a shaila, an unresolved question. What do you do when you have a shaila that you can't answer? For the deraisa, you machmir. For the rabbanon, you mekel, which is fine because if you remember, we didn't hit Sfekos yet. Until we hit Sfekos, we're talking here about shailas of bugs that you see. This is not maybe there's a bug. This is bug right in front of you. So the bug's in front of you. It's a safek deraisa. If the bug would be usher, it's usher with deraisa. It's a safek deraisa. So we'd say is you want to know if the bug is on the outside of the fruit, is it usher or is it not? I mean, you're holding your fruit and there's a bug on the outside of the fruit. It was pirish onto the peel of the tree. Is it mutter? Is it usher? So the din is that it's usher. Safek deraisa lomar. Okay. Now, crazy place. He says.
How do you ever, if going from the flesh of the pit?
Yes.
How would you even know that?
How would you know what?
Whichever way is usher, whichever way is leaving its
Riverside, yeah.
How would you even know that?
So you open up a plum,
right,
and you see a bug on the pit.
But how do you know it didn't go into the flesh? How do you know that it wasn't traveling within the fruit?
No. If it moves within the fruit, it's still mutter. It's only when it leaves the fruit that it becomes usher. So you open up the plum, and there it is.
And then it calls. Let's say going to the pit is usher. Let's say it goes to the pit.
Let's say going to the pit is usher. Right. So you open up the plum, and there it is sitting on the pit.
Okay.
If it's on the pit, you know it crawls from the fruit onto the pit. Here it is sitting there on the pit.
But if it crawled lomar, how do you know that it didn't go back? I'm saying it.
Well, you're seeing it on the pit right now.
I know. How do you know that?
Well, how do you mean when you see it in the
pit and went back home?
You're saying if I would see it on the flesh, how do I know it didn't once go onto the pit earlier in its life?
I'm
not sure.
Doing within the fruit, how do you even know?
You saying so? Why are we always choshesh that it slipped onto the pit and came back in? I'm not sure. GPS. There we go. I don't know. Okay, good question.
In fact, probably you assume that when you find it, you assume that that's...
Maybe that's what it is. Okay, so the crazy place he says, it's very nice to say that we're going to be machmir for deraisa. He says, but I have to tell you, he says, the last case that I told you, which is Pirish meis, even according to those Rishonim who hold that Pirish meis is usher, Pirish meis meaning it died before it left. It was Pirish when it was already dead. Even those Rishonim who hold that it's usher, even they only hold midrabanan. He says it's not possible that Pirish meis can be usher midraisa. He says, because the pasuk says, sheretz hasheretz al aretz. He says, how can it be that the thing is dead and it could be sheretz hasheretz al aretz? It died into the fruit. He says, that sure is an issur d'rabbanan. And he explains the issur d'rabbanan is because, the issur d'rabbanan is because if you have a bug that's out of its fruit, to everybody else it looks like it was pirish and it should be usher. So if you'll eat it, it will give the impression you're eating something that was pirish from the fruit, so midrabbanan it's usher. Okay? So he says, that child of the Gemara about pirish meis is for sure a child of a d'rabbanan. And the male, he says, since it's a safek d'rabbanan, he says, even with Philos Rishonim, that was the Shiloh of the Gemara, they had that girsa, even according to them, the din is that it's mutter. Okay, so again, the Shach said it's mutter because he says we don't pass with those Rishonim. We pass that the Gemara never asked that question in the first place. And the crazy place says, even according to those Rishonim themselves, it's a talk of the Gemara Shiloh was Pirish meis, but the answer is Safek D'Rabbanan and Safek D'Rabbanan L'kul. That's what the crazy place says. Okay? Most of the Achronim, a whole bunch of Achronim don't agree with them for 4 reasons why. Okay, four ways that I don't know reason. 4 ways that they disagree with him. Okay, the first is The first is the Pri Megadim brings this crazy place, and he says, sounds pretty good, sounds pretty right, but he ends off tzarachiyim. Okay, now the Pri Megadim a lot of times ends off tzarachiyim. Okay, even though he really knows what he's talking about, he ends off a lot of times with tzarachiyim. I just don't know what he means when over here the tzarachiyim is tzarachiyim. Maybe it's Asam D'Oraisa, and therefore the crazy place is wrong. Or Tzarech Ian, maybe the crazy place is really right, and we should really consider that maybe he's right, and Pirish meis should be mutter. I don't know what his Ion is. Ion is as in, maybe the crazy place has a point, and he might really be right. Or maybe it's really Asam D'Oraisa. I'm not sure what Tzarech Ian, maybe both.
He said maybe the crazy place is right, maybe
he says, he brings the crazy place and he says, I think that it makes sense what he's saying. Now what needs still to be resolved? There's 2 ways to... The question is like this. Does he mean to say is, we have to think about if it's even Asher with the right? Are you saying that's the same question? Okay. I'm confused because I'm going to say the next thing in a second. There are other reasons why it should be Asher even if the crazy place is right. That's what I mean. Okay. Fine. Okay. The Chazon Ish says,
if he's right, or even if he's right, it still have to be mine.
Correct. It might still be Asher anyhow. Yes, that's right. Okay. The Chazon Ish says, the crazy place is wrong. Okay. It's not true. He says, first of all, the Chazon Ish says the second of all, but I'm saying it first of all. He says, second of all, he says, the fact that the Gemara asks this question together with all the other ones, I'm going to stick in an editorial. It's actually the first question of the Gemara, implies that just like all the other ones are all shilos of a deraisa, this one is also a shilos of deraisa. He says, isn't it strange? The Gemara asks 6 questions. 1 is a d'Rabbanan and 6 are a shiloh of a d'Oraisa. He says, the fact the way the Gemara said it, and I'm into it, it's even actually the very first question, is Pirish meis, implies that they're all the same shiloh. They're all the same level of shiloh. This is also a d'Oraisa, this is also a d'Oraisa. So that's one. That's the second thing he says. Now the first thing he says is a more, to him, he says this one is the ikka one. This is, I guess, you have to be a certain kind of person to say this. He says this, according to the crazy placey, the Gemara's shiloh is, really, the Gemara tried with Pirish meis. What's the Gemara's question really is there an Issur D'Rabbanan on Pirish meis? That's the Gemara's question, right? Did the Chachamim answer in this case, or did they not answer it? But he also Issur D'Rabbanan. He says there's no such thing as a shaila as to whether something is Issur D'Rabbanan. No such thing. He says there are shailas where the details of a D'Rabbanan, did the Chacham answer in this case or only in this case? But there's never such a thing. This is a conceptual. There's never such a thing as a machlokes. Is there an Issur D'Rabbanan? That's according to Crazy Place, the Gemara Sfekos is there an Issur D'Rabbanan in this case? Did the Chachamim create an Issur to eat a bug that's really mutter? So he says such an idea that we ask, is there an Issur D'Rabbanan? No such thing. There's no such thing as a Sfekos if there's an Issur D'Rabbanan. There's only Sfekos within an Issur D'Rabbanan. Yes, there's an Issur. Did they mean it in this case or did they mean it in this case? But to say, is there no such thing? Okay, so.
I understand that why it's coming from, but I think I've encountered the Gemara.
So again, if you have to really know everything to say that, I don't know enough to tell you. But Yassi's going to tell us all his examples.
That's not a Gemara recently. It's not the only way to understand the Gemara. It says whether the Chacham made created a certain din or not.
So, I'm not sure. Maybe he would tell. Maybe Machlokes is different. The one here is a suffix. Pirish meis mahu. The one has a suffix. Maybe a suffix is. I don't know. Okay. So.
whether there is. You can have Machayim the Talmidin with the Shvisas Keda with no Shvisas Keda.
Right. Okay, that's true. So
what was that?
You can have Machayim whether there is a Gzer or not, like the Machayim whether there is Shvisas Keda, but there's no Shvisas Keda.
Okay.
Right? But to say, Gemara, nobody knows if there is or there is. The Gemara says, is there such? Is anybody know? Hello? Is anybody know?
right. Again, that's what he means. And if the Gemara should be mesupik about it, he says that there's no such thing as that. Okay, so
No such thing, maybe it's not. I said it's not usual.
no, he didn't say it's not usual. He says there's no such thing. You go look it up. It's in Yudalad Sifkat Hey. Okay. The meis is the Beis Yosef sure implies like he goes to the Chazanish. Not the second part. The Beis Yosef says all these questions. He brings all these questions to the Gemara, and he ends off and says, okay, he says, by Pirish, he then brings Pirish meis, this question if you should take Pirish meis, and he says, since it's a Safek device, so you should be Machmer. That's how he ends off. He says, since we have all these Sfekos, that's a Safek device, so you should be Machmer. Surely implying that he went to the Chazanish to the Christian.
He says, "Kufa come to argue the Beis Yosef."
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, okay. That's correct. So he's arguing that, but I'm saying that is the impression one. I'm saying, you're right. He's arguing the Shulchan Aruch, because the Shulchan Aruch wouldn't have, the Shulchan Aruch says, brings it in if it's a Shita. What I mean is that even so they said these are all lumped together. I mean, the fact that we plot them all together and treat them all as one big happy family, okay, you're right. That's true. That's really what he's arguing. Okay. Next is, in the Franco Rambam, there's something on the side called Hagoyes HaRamach. I'm not sure what that is. Who is it? Okay, there we go. Thank you. Good to hear. Anyhow, and he says,
the regular Rambam is not there.
I don't think it's okay, that's right. So that's right. He brings the Sfekos of the Gemara, and he says, any chol, his word, chol Teiku the Isur l'chumra. Okay, he says the rule is anytime you have a Teiku in the Gemara, you have to be machmer on it. Okay, so he says, and that's why the Rambam is being machmer. And he says, now you should know. Yes. Then he says you should know. The Rif says in Shabbos, he brings one case in Shabbos, I don't know enough Rifs to tell you this. The Rif says, now read the words from a Rif there. He says, the Kaimalan, the Kol Teiku the Raisa L'chumra, U'Darbaran L'Kula. So here, he just told you that the rule is, Teikus you're always Machmir. He brings that the Rif says, that no, by the Raisa you're Machmir, but Darbaran you Meko. And then he says, you should just know, he doesn't tell you what he means, he says, you should just know, it's not such a kasha. The rule is you're always Machmir, Darbaran, on Teikus, but don't be so worried about the kashas. I have answers to those questions. Okay, so anyhow, and you should know just within this pshat. I'm not hearing a pshat. I'm not hearing the end of the answer. I'm not explaining it. There is a Prim Gadol in Aruch brings a Ramah who says that is talking about a Teiku D'Rabbanan, a Shiloh of a D'Rabbanan. The Gemara says Teiku on. The Ramah says you should be machmer also. So such an idea that you should be machmer on a under Rabbanan. Now, the sort of an extension of that is that the Yad Avram, right here on the Shulchan Aruch, brings a Marshal, okay, and afterwards I saw that many other people brought it also, Marshal and Be'er, who says that if the Gemara asks a question and doesn't answer the question, then we say, Safek D'Raisa L'Chumra, D'Rabbanan L'Kula. If the Gemara asks a question, that's what we do. If the Gemara says the words Teiku, that's different than if the Gemara just didn't answer the Shaila. If the Gemara said Teiku, the Gemara is being kaver. This is not decided and somehow understood, and that is, and you have to be machmir. If we don't even know the answer to that question, everyone has to be machmir on that. In other words, if the Gemara just doesn't answer the kasha, it's left as a shaila, so you apply the rules of Safek D'Raisa L'Chumra, D'Rabbanan L'Kula. If the Gemara specifically says Teiku, that's like an indication of this doesn't even follow the regular rules, and you have to be machmir in this case, which maybe that's what this person, this Hagoyes HaRamach, means. I mean, it's not like the Rif. The Rif, he brings himself a Rif who says not like that. By Teikus you could be making D'Rabbanan, but the Marshal argues, and the Marshal says that by Teikus, so there's an Gemara. Our Gemara answered Teiku to these shilas. It had 3 shilas, and then 3 shilas. In each group it says Teiku to. So according to the Marshal, the reason why it would be machmir is even if it's a shilah of a D'Rabbanan, the fact that the Gemara says the words Teiku at the end of it tells us that we should be machmir about that then and not be makel about it. The Yad Avram brings that this Prima Goldman's back and forth about this. Some agree with him and some don't. Prima Goldman brings this Marshal in a few places. Sometimes he seems to agree to it and not agree to it. And the Yam Shlomo himself wants to say that it's a Machlokes Rishonim. The Yam Shlomo wants to say Machlokes Rishonim whether we always pass it. Remember I said to you about a Rif. Actually, that's backwards because the Marshal brings that the Rif agrees with him. We saw the Rif does not agree with him. And it's just worth noting, let me just tell you, just to put the Yam Shlomo in context. The Yam Shlomo is talking about a specific din. He's talking about a specific din in, I forgot which Halachos. Tav. Tezayin. What halachos is that? David? Anyhow, I don't know. Anyway, Tav Tezayin. And in that case that he's talking about, Shulchan Aruch is Mekel. It's a Teiku on the Darbanan. Teiku on the Darbanan. The Marshal in that case is saying, we always machmer for Teikus, even if it's a Darbanan. And the specific case that he's talking about is a case where the Shulchan Aruch is Mekel. Okay? Meaning because of the Safek Darbanan Mekula. That's why he's being Mekel, because of Teiku. So not like this Marshal. Okay? But such a thing, anyhow, there's such a sheet of the Marshal that even were to be a Darbanan, since the Gemara says Teiku, therefore Mekel. Okay? So we're gonna, so anyhow.
Actually, I just found this over there. It's the opposite, Teiku. That's been down from what I remember, yeah. Azin Lakula Vishari, the Teiku Derabanan.
Right, the Teiku by a Darbanan. Again, so I told him, the Rif says himself also, by the Rices Umakra, by Darbanan Umekel. The Marshal, this is the sheet of the Marshal, that says that whenever it's a Teiku, it's automatically L'chumra. I'm telling you, the Shulchan Aruch doesn't pass like that. L'chumra, automatically L'chumra, even by Darbanan. But not everybody agrees with it. You're showing me that not everybody. I agree that not everybody agrees with it. Okay, so so again, just to summarize where we were, the Shulchan Aruch, the Gemara had 6 cases. On all those cases, were machmer. There's a machlok to about one of those cases, which is Pirish meis. Whether is that one of the shilas of the Gemara? The machaber is machmer, or the machaber appears to be machmer. The shach is not so convinced. There was another case of charunak of l'chutz. Another question of did the bug did it leave or did it not leave? We didn't talk about that because that's really going to be connected to halacha. Okay.